So good afternoon, everybody, and we'll start with this late hour session today because of SYBCom internals. Uh, I'm going to discuss a topic called as income from capital gains. The head called as income from capital gains. So far, we have discussed other heads of income like income from salary, house property, business income, and other sources also. And the last head of income for discussion is income from capital gains. Now in this head, what we are going to discuss about is basically what kind of income is taxed under the head income from capital gains. How do we tax the income under this particular head, and couple of exemptions which will be covered by the syllabus. This is going to be the focus of discussion. So let's begin. Section 45 is the charging section. 45 talks about what kind of income is liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. Now, before we understand the provisions of section 45, we need to make a passing reference to distinction between capital receipts and revenue receipts. This part we also referred when we discussed about income, and I had told you that under the provisions of law, under the current provisions of income tax, usually most of the receipts which are in the nature of revenue receipts are liable for tax, except those from tax under a particular provision like section 10. Whereas most of the capital receipts are usually not subject to tax, except the ones which are specially made liable for tax by virtue of a particular provision. And income from capital gain is one such type of provision or one set of provisions which deals with capital receipts which are liable for tax under certain circumstances. We also thought about what is the concept of revenue receipt and capital receipt, and I gave you one simple test. You have an identifiable source of income and it generates a stream of receipts. Usually those receipts are revenue receipts, whereas if you dispose of that particular source of income itself, what you get is a capital receipt. To give you a simple example, you're holding some equity shares of a company. It gives you certain dividend income from year to year. That is a revenue receipt. It is revenue generated by a source of income. And when you dispose of that source of income or when you sell those equity shares, what you get is a capital receipt. So usually capital receipts are not taxable, not offered for tax because of various provisions, but generally but at times there are some sections which deal with capital receipts, and those capital receipts are then liable for tax under a particular head of income. We have a couple of capital receipts like your compensation on VRS or retrenchment compensation, which are liable for tax as income from salary. Likewise, here section 45 covers capital receipts which are liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. Now, in order to tax under the head income from capital gain, what are the requirements of section 45? Section 45 says the income should be in connection with a capital asset. So we need to then understand what do you mean by capital asset. So we are referring to the income related to a capital asset, and subsequently under section 214 we will see what is the meaning of capital asset. It also says that the asset is transferred by the assessee and such transfer is made during the previous year. So we are looking at a capital asset which is transferred by the assessee and such transfer has been made during the previous year. And in such a case, any gain arising from such transfer is liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. So these cumulative conditions have to be satisfied in order to tax a particular income under the head capital gain. Namely, it should be arising from a capital asset which is transferred by the assessee during the previous year, and there is a gain which arises from such transfer, then such gain will be liable for tax under this head. If such conditions are not fulfilled, then the income will not be liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. For example, if there is a transfer of a particular asset, but which is not a capital asset by definition, then you cannot bring that income under section 45. You cannot tax that income under section 45. Similarly, there is a capital asset, but the transfer as per provisions of law does not cover transfer of that particular kind. Then again, even if there is a gain of that kind, that will not be liable for tax under this head. So you have to fulfill all those conditions together, and then only a particular item of income will fall within the purview of income from capital gains. So one by one, now we'll understand these terms. A lot of technical issues are there. We'll try to take care of those issues also, and then we'll move on with the computation of income from capital gains. So let us understand what is the definition of capital asset as per section 2, subsection 14. By definition, it says it includes property of any kind, whether fixed or circulating, whether movable or immovable, whether tangible or intangible. Okay, so basically it's a very wide definition which says that it's a property of any kind. Capital asset includes property of any kind. It may be fixed, it may be circulating, it may be movable or it may be immovable, it may be tangible or intangible. So all such properties by virtue of this definition are included within the purview of the word capital asset. So some of the examples or what kind of items are covered under the head capital asset that we'll try to see. First is a right in relation to an Indian company, including rights to control management, etc. This was a recent amendment sometimes in 2012, if I remember the year correctly. This was mainly a result of a tax dispute with Vodafone. Okay, so by virtue of this amendment which was made then, if a company has a right in relation to an Indian company, including the rights to control management, etc., that is treated as a capital asset. Then normal equity shares, preference shares are also treated as capital asset. Any units of mutual fund, if you're holding any units of a mutual fund, either equity oriented fund or debt oriented fund, all of them will be treated as a capital asset. A business undertaking itself is a capital asset. A partner's share in a partnership firm is also treated as a capital asset. Then there are examples like route permits. Route permit is a license to operate a transport vehicle on a particular route. So that route permit is also held as or treated as capital asset. Leasehold rights with reference to land or premises are also capital assets. Even the tenancy rights, you are using a particular property as a tenant. So you have tenancy rights. These tenancy rights are also considered to be capital asset. Goodwill. Goodwill is also one fine example of capital assets. So basically capital asset is a property of any kind, fixed, circulating, movable, immovable, tangible, intangible. Whether you are using it for business or profession also is not a relevant criteria. It may be used for business or profession, or it may be otherwise. Even in that case, that property which falls into these kind of parameters will be treated as a capital asset. Now, when we discuss the definition of capital asset, we need to carefully understand some of the inclusions and exclusions. Okay, having defined the capital asset as property of every kind, of every description, including fixed, circulating, movable, immovable, tangible, intangible, etc., etc. Now we are on certain exclusions. So the definition excludes certain items and says that these will not be treated as capital asset. The first among them is stock in trade, which is stock of finished goods, tradable items, raw materials, work in progress, etc. So this kind of item, these kind of items are not treated as a capital asset. These are trading assets. These are not treated as capital assets. Then personal effects in the nature of a movable property. If you are having any personal effects which are movable, not immovable, only movable items, then those are not treated as capital assets. Now we need to understand carefully what is meaning of personal effect. Personal effects are the items which are used by the assessee for his personal purpose, for his personal use, or for the use by his family members. Those are called as personal effects, which should be in the nature of movable property. Then it will not be treated as a capital asset. To give you a couple of examples of personal effects are your household ordinary furniture. Okay, I'm using the word ordinary furniture. Ordinary household furniture like your showcase, sofa seats, other types of cupboards and those kind of things. These are personal effects. These are movable properties. Even a motor car which you have purchased or a two-wheeler which you have purchased for personal use, not for business purposes, but for personal use, it is a movable property. It is a personal effect. Your electronic items in house which are used for household purpose, like a TV set or air conditioners or those kind of things, these are personal effects, movable properties used by the assessee for his personal purpose or for the use by his family members. Those are not treated as capital asset. Now, when you say personal effects, it does not include certain valuables, and those valuables will be treated as a part of capital asset. So, though you are saying personal effects are not a capital asset, you have to consider whether these personal effects are some of the specified items, because those specified items, though you may call it as personal effect, will be treated as a capital asset. So, which are those? One is jewelry. Then archaeological collections, drawings, paintings, sculptures, or work of any art. So if the assessee is having any jewelry or any archaeological collections, which will have some value in those kind of markets, drawings or paintings, which are quite valuable at times, and then sculptures or any such work of art, then such items, though kept by the assessee for personal purpose, will be treated as a capital asset. So if jewelry is transferred, or if archaeological collections or paintings are sold, sculptures are sold or transferred, it will be a transfer of a capital asset, and the gain will be liable for tax under the head income from capital gain. So two exclusions we have seen so far. One is stock in trade, stock of raw material, etc. Personal effects, the assets or items which are used by the assessee for his personal use or for the use of family members. But other than some specialized items, some special items which are provided here, like jewelry, archaeological collections, paintings, drawings, etc. Now, what do you understand by jewelry? We need to understand carefully what is meant by jewelry. Basically, jewelry will include ornaments made of gold, silver, now platinum also for last few years, or any other precious metals, including alloys of this, and whether with or without precious or semi-precious stones, etc. So very clear definition meaning of jewelry is provided. Jewelry will include all sorts of ornaments which are usually made from either gold, silver, platinum, etc., or some of the precious metals, other precious metals, or even a combination of this in the form of alloys. They may be studded with precious or semi-precious stones, or they may be without such stones. Even in that case, it will still be treated as a jewelry. Now, having seen what is the meaning of jewelry, let's come to two items which may have some kind of a debate or some kind of a issue with them. One is furniture or wearing apparel, which is studded with precious stones or woven with gold and silver threads, etc. What happens to them? See, these questions have come up because of certain judicial cases where there was a dispute as to whether it should be treated as jewelry, whether it should be treated as a capital asset, or whether it should be treated as a personal effect. So in this case, suppose there is a furniture, and the furniture is studded with some precious stones or valuable stones, or it's used with some gold or silver kind of coating or paint, plates. Or if there is a wearing apparel and which is studded with precious stones, diamonds, or woven with gold and silver thread, etc., are we going to call it as a personal effect and exclude it from the purview of capital asset? or is it included in capital asset? And the answer is in such case, it will be treated as a capital asset. Mainly these cases were related to some of the rulers of former princely states. You are aware that before 1947, there were various princely states in India. And these princely states were managed by Rajas and Maharajas and those kind of people, right? Now, these people had furniture which had golden plating, which had some diamonds or those kind of things studied in that. They had their special dress to be worn in Darbar, which were studied with these kind of diamonds or precious stones, or at times had embroidery comprising of gold and silver thread, etc. So the question was raised whether these are capital assets or not, and the answer is these will be treated as capital asset because it has diamonds or those kind of things, special stones attached to that. So it is not an ordinary furniture or an ordinary wearing apparel. It is something special which has all those things, and therefore it will be treated as a capital asset. Same ruling, same logic applies even to utensils, etc., which are studded with precious stones or made using gold, silver, etc. They will be treated as capital asset for this purpose, because even the utensils made of gold, silver plates, etc., may be used by these former rulers of the princely states. So again, the question was whether it should be treated as capital asset was not, and the answer is yes. These items will also be treated as capital assets. Have you understood these two exclusions, namely stock in trade and personal effects? And while discussing personal effects, I have also tried to explain what is not a personal effect, like jewelry, archaeological collections, etc., which will be very clearly covered within the meaning of the word capital asset. Have you understood the contents of this slide? Then we can move forward. Any questions on this? Shall I move forward?
Yes.
Now we continue with few more exclusions. So these items are not covered under the head capital asset. This is the list of certain bonds. Most of these bonds were issued to offer a protection or rather conversion of black money into normal economy. So these bonds were issued by government from time to time to allow people to disclose their black money and then channelize it in normal economy. So all these bonds which were issued for this purpose, most of them exactly are of the same nature: gold bonds and national defense gold bonds, then monetization scheme related certificates, special bearer bonds. Okay, so all these bonds, specific ones, are not treated as a capital asset. These are excluded from the purview of capital asset. Then one more item is excluded from the purview of capital asset, and that is agricultural land. So agricultural land which fulfills certain parameters, which fulfills a test, is not treated as a capital asset. So therefore, if you transfer the agricultural land which fulfills these parameters, then the corresponding gain is not a capital gain, because that agricultural land is not a capital asset. So where is the exclusion? Which land will be covered in this? That we'll have to see now. Firstly, it says agricultural land situated in rural area. So there are two tests to be considered here. One, it should be agricultural land. It should be used for agricultural purpose. So one has to prove that the land at the time of sale is actually being used for agricultural purpose by applying various kind of tests. Okay, that is one. Secondly, it should be situated in rural area. And what is meant by rural area for this purpose? What is the test that is provided here? It says any area which is outside the jurisdiction of municipal authority, that includes municipal corporation as well as cantonment board also. Okay, having a population of 10,000 or more and should not be within the distance provided in the table below. So a meaning of rural area is given, saying that it is outside jurisdiction of a municipal authority, that is municipal corporation or cantonment board, having population of 10,000 or more. That is one part of it. And second, it should not fall within the distance provided below. So what are the limits in terms of distances? First limit is 2 kilometers from the local limits of municipal authority where the population is more than 10,000 but not more than 1 lakh. Then within 6 kilometers from the local limits of municipal authority where the population is more than 1 lakh but not more than 10 lakhs. And the third limit is within 8 kilometers from the local limits of municipal authority where the population is more than 10 lakhs. So if the criteria applicable based on the limits and the population is fulfilled, then and then only that area will qualify as rural area. And the agricultural land situated in that rural area will only be the one which will be excluded from the purview of capital asset. So land should be used for agricultural purpose at the relevant point of time. Plus, it has to fulfill these conditions in order to exclude it from the purview of the word capital asset. Then and then only you will get exemption, and that asset will not be treated as a capital asset. That agricultural land will not be treated as a capital asset having fulfilled applicable conditions as provided by the law. So with this, we have come to the end of discussion on exclusions of capital asset. Now we come to the scope of income under section 45 and which are the circumstances under which the income is liable for tax under section 45. Firstly, if you transfer any capital asset or sell a capital asset or exchange a capital asset, then corresponding gain is liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. So three types of transactions are covered here. One, a transfer, second one, a sale, and a third one, an exchange. In case of sale, there are two parties. There is a consideration, and at the agreed consideration, the asset is transferred by seller to the buyer. In case of exchange, it may be a barter kind of exchange for a valuable consideration. And third one is a other mode of transfer of a capital asset. And in such a case, if there is a gain arising from such transfer or sale or exchange, it is liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. The next is relinquishment or extinguishment of a right attached to the asset. Now, in these cases, the asset may continue its existence, but the right to hold an asset comes to an end for that particular person. And in that case, if he gets a consideration for that, that gain will be liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. Couple of examples in this case are amount received as a buyback consideration for buyback of shares, or even the amount received on redemption of preference shares. These are a couple of examples of this kind, where your right is either relinquished or extinguished, and then you get a consideration for such act, which is liable for tax as income from capital gains. The next is a compulsory acquisition. Now, usually, when we think of a transfer or sale of capital asset, it's a voluntary transfer. There is a willing seller who wants to dispose of his capital asset, and there is a willing buyer who wants to acquire that capital asset, and there is a flow of consideration. But in some cases, there is a compulsory acquisition of a capital asset by government or any such other authority. For example, whenever the highway projects are done, at times there is a compulsory acquisition of land. Okay, even in cities or in urban areas for some public utility projects, maybe a bridge, overbridge, or maybe a flyover, or maybe construction of say metro kind of a project, there is a compulsory acquisition of land. The owner of land may not be willing to surrender the asset, but it is compulsorily acquired by the government or the authority by virtue of certain statutory provisions. Even in such compulsory acquisition, whatever compensation the person receives, based on that, the income will be liable for tax under the head income from capital gains. So even if there is a compulsory acquisition and the compensation is received by a person for compulsory acquisition of his capital asset, such compensation will be liable for tax. Based on that, you have to calculate what is the income liable for tax under section 45. Now, when the compulsory acquisition happens, there is one more possibility. Either the person whose asset is acquired is agreeing for the compensation, but at times they may not agree with the compensation and they may go to the judicial forums like court to get additional compensation. For example, for a highway project, if somebody's land is acquired by the government and government gives them compensation, that compensation will lead to capital gain and it will be liable for tax under section 45. Now, suppose that person is not happy with the amount of compensation, so he seeks a relief from a court of law. And after a few years, the court delivers a judgment and the government is directed to pay additional compensation to that landowner. So what happens to that additional compensation? Even that additional compensation will lead to a capital gain. So whenever there is a compulsory acquisition, it is not only the original compensation received under compulsory acquisition plan, but even the additional compensation awarded by court of law, etc., which is received after a few years. It will still lead to income under the head capital gains. So that income also will not escape taxation. That additional compensation will still be liable under the same head. Then insurance compensation. Suppose there is a destruction of a capital asset like machinery and or even building, and the insurance compensation is received. One has to calculate the capital gain by applying the appropriate provisions. Even that will not be liable for any kind of exemption. Then conversion of asset into stock in trade or vice versa also. Suppose there is a conversion of capital asset into stock in trade. It is a notional gain in this case, but that notional gain is also liable for tax under the head income from capital asset. Under the head income from capital gains. Suppose a person is holding some stock of shares. He has invested in few shares, etc., which is his investment, which is a capital asset for him. Suppose he wants to start a business and he introduces those investments into that after converting them as a stock in trade. Suppose he wants to start as a trading business in equities or whatever, and he introduces that investment as stock in trade. So initially it was investment. Now it is converted into a stock in trade. Even such conversion, which is a notional transaction, will lead to capital gain, and there are special provisions to deal with this. And that capital gain on this conversion is also liable for tax. It's a notional gain at this point in time, so it will still be liable for tax. Then there may be a transfer of capital asset between the firm and a partner or vice versa. A partner transfers a capital asset to the firm as his contribution or whatever, or a firm transfers the capital asset owned by the partnership firm to the partner. Now, in either case, there is a transfer of capital asset, and in both the cases, it will lead to a capital gain. And there are special provisions to deal with this situation, how to find out the value of consideration, how to find out the capital gain in this case. All those things are taken care of under the relevant provisions. Same is the case with conversion into stock in trade. There is a special provision to deal with to find out what is the consideration in this case and how to calculate the capital gain. Then repurchase of units under ELSS, Equity Linked Savings Scheme. In 80C, section 80C, we had discussed one item, we had referred one item, that investment in Equity Linked Savings Scheme, okay, are eligible for deduction under 80C. Now these ELSS, Equity Linked Savings Scheme, if these units are repurchased and the investor gets back his money with some added advantage, because there will be some capital appreciation in that, then such transaction will also lead to income liable for tax under the head capital gains by virtue of section 45. So even the repurchase of capital units, units issued and purchased under ELSS is subject matter of capital gain, and accordingly you have to find out what is the capital gain when the units are repurchased by the mutual fund. Have you understood the scope what we have discussed just now? Yes, scope under the head section for capital gains by virtue of section 45.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Now there are certain transactions which are not regarded as transfer. Let me just go back to previous slide. Okay. Yeah. Here we are saying that the transfer is made during the previous year. Then the gain is liable for tax. If you transfer a capital asset and the transfer is made during the previous year, then the gain is liable for tax. That time I told you, you have to satisfy all the conditions. So if the asset is not a capital asset, gain will not be taxable as capital gain. If such transfer itself is not a transfer, then even in that case, the gain will not be liable for tax. So these are some of the exceptional cases. We saw one exceptional case like personal effect, which is not a capital asset. So if you transfer a personal effect, if you sell a personal car, even at a profit, it is not liable for tax as capital gain because personal car is a personal effect. It is not a capital asset. Likewise, if you transfer a particular capital asset, but such transfer is not within the meaning of transfer under these provisions, then even that gain will not be liable for tax. So in this slide, what we are looking at is basically what kind of transfers are not regarded as transfers. Okay, these are some of the examples just to give you some idea. One is distribution of assets in specie on partition of HUF. If the HUF is holding certain assets and there is a partition of HUF and these assets are distributed to the members, then that transaction is not regarded as a transfer. So under these kind of situations, it will not lead to any kind of capital gain. Then transfer under gift, will or irrevocable trust, etc. Whenever a person transfers any asset under a gift, shares are gifted under a gift deed, or real estate property is gifted under a gift deed, or even in a will or through a irrevocable trust deed, then such transactions are not regarded as transfer for this purpose, and it will not lead to capital gain in those cases. Transfers in approved plans of mergers and acquisitions. Okay, if there is a merger or acquisition plan which is approved as per all statutory requirements, then the transfer of assets in that subject to those applicable conditions will not be treated as a transfer. Then transfers in business reorganization, even those typical cases which are as per applicable statutory requirements, it will not be treated as a transfer of asset for this purpose. Then transfer on conversion of a proprietary or partnership concern into a limited company. So if you convert your proprietary concern or partnership into a limited company, again, it is not regarded as a transfer, and accordingly, the gain, even if it is there, it will not be liable for tax as income from capital gain. Now, we don't have a detailed discussion on this in your syllabus. I've just made a passing reference. So you should understand, if at all there are transactions of such nature, then the corresponding gain is not liable for tax as capital gain, because these are treated as no transfers, or these are not considered as transfers for the purpose of capital gain under the applicable provisions. Now we come to very important aspect of capital gain, because you need to understand whether a particular transaction has led to a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain. If it is a short-term capital gain, the tax rate and methodology of calculation will differ. If it is a long-term capital gain, then again, the calculation of gain methodology as well as the tax rate will differ. And then whether a particular gain is a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain will depend on what is called as holding period. In other words, how long you have been holding that particular asset, what is the length of the period for which you are holding the asset, that will decide whether we are looking at a short-term capital asset or a long-term capital asset. So if you transfer a short-term capital asset, it will be a short-term capital gain. If you transfer a long-term capital asset, it will be a long-term capital gain. And how do we identify whether a particular asset is a short-term or long-term? it depends on the holding period applicable to that particular category of capital asset. So how long you have been holding that capital asset will generally decide what is the status of that asset, either short term or long term. Now, when you determine this holding period, there are a couple of exceptions. Again, we are not going to discuss these exceptions in detail because it's not part of syllabus. I'll only highlight a couple of them which you may come across most of the times. One is capital assets acquired under section 49(1). Section 49(1) is a case where you are becoming the owner of a capital asset by virtue of a gift or will or partition of a HUF, etc. So there, what happens is the period for which earlier owner was holding the asset is also added to the period for which you will hold the asset. So why, suppose Mr. A, he has acquired, let's say, a flat from his father under a will. After his father passed away, as per the will, Mr. A became the owner of that flat. Now for Mr. A, whatever was the holding period of his father will also be considered for him to determine whether it is a short-term or long-term capital asset, because he has acquired the capital asset in one of the modes, that is inheritance or under will, under section 49(1). So period for which it was held by the earlier owner will also be added to the holding period of the SCC. Then transfer of shares under approved plans of merger and acquisition. So you might be holding a share of a particular company which has undergone an approved plan of merger or acquisition, and then you get the shares of a new company or a new entity which comes into existence. So there, how do you determine the holding period? Again, there is a special provision, but your holding period of earlier shares is also considered for this purpose. Then another example on holding period is a special case of right shares or bonus shares. You are holding shares of a company. After a few years, company comes up with either bonus issue or right issue. And being eligible, you get those right shares or bonus shares. So how do you determine the holding period in such a cases? The answer is, for right shares, the day you are allotted the right shares, your holding period will start. It will not go back to the original date on which you had acquired the original shares, but it will start for right shares from the day right shares were allotted to you. Likewise, for bonus shares, the holding period will commence on the date on which the allotment of bonus shares has taken place. Again, it will not go back to the old date when you had acquired the original shares. So for right shares or bonus shares also, you have to see the date of allotment, and the holding period will go forward from the date of allotment. It will not go back to the original date on which you acquired the original shares of a company and based on which you have acquired the right shares or bonus shares, as the case may be. That is not permissible. It is from the date of allotment of right shares or date of allotment of bonus shares, as the case may be. So for every case, you have to see what is the holding period to decide whether it is a short-term or long-term capital asset. And if you transfer a short-term capital asset, it's a short-term capital gain. Provisions are different. If you transfer a long-term capital asset, the provisions are different, and it will be based on the holding period for that particular asset. Then only it will become a long-term capital asset. So let us understand what is the period for which you should hold the asset to qualify it as either short-term or long-term. And as I told you, it depends on category of assets. So if equity shares or preference shares, listed shares are held for more than 12 months, then it will be treated as a long-term capital asset. In case of unlisted company, it is more than 24 months. Equity or preference shares, more than 24 months. Immovable property, again more than 24 months. Debentures, bonds, government securities, derivatives, all listed, again 12 months plus. Units of UTI, listed, unlisted, whatever, 12 months plus. Units of equity oriented mutual funds, whether listed or unlisted, again 12 months plus. Units of debt oriented mutual fund, listed or unlisted, it's 36 months. This is the only item where the period is longer, 36 months plus. And zero coupon bonds, either listed or unlisted, 12 months plus. So if you fulfill this criteria of holding period, minimum holding period, then it becomes a long-term capital asset. Else it will become a short-term capital asset. So for each category of asset, special provisions have been made about the holding period. It could be either 12 plus, 24 plus, or 36 plus, depending on the category of asset. And once you fulfill that criteria, once you hold asset for that particular period, it becomes a long-term capital asset, or it will remain a short-term capital asset. And the calculation of either long-term or short-term capital gain will have to be factored in accordingly, because the provisions are different for calculation. So we will briefly see how do we calculate the long-term capital gains, and then we will stop for the day. And next time we'll again continue with this, because going forward we have to discuss computation also, and we have to discuss exemptions also, and we have to understand all these terms also. Consideration, what should the expenditure in connection with transfer, what do you mean by index cost, and all those things we'll have to understand. So we'll just begin with the discussion, but we'll not conclude this. We'll just understand the contents of this slide, and then we will stop for the day. So we are looking at gain arising from transfer of a long-term capital asset. Our starting point will be full value of consideration. We will separately discuss what is full value of consideration, but generally it means the consideration which you receive for the transfer of a capital asset. In some cases, you may have to consider fair market value. In some cases, it will be normal consideration or selling price which flows to the SAC. So we'll see those typical cases, but basically it is a full value of consideration which is accruing to the SAC or which is received by the SAC for a transfer of capital asset. In case of a compulsory acquisition, full value of consideration will include the compensation received by the SAC or the additional compensation received afterwards by the SAC. So we'll discuss this in full. Then we are reducing the expenses in connection with transfer. If you have incurred any expenditure in connection with this transfer, we'll see the example separately. Those expenses are deductible, and we get what is called as a net consideration. And from this net consideration, we deduct what is called as index cost of acquisition and index cost of improvement if it is applicable, and then we derive what is a long-term capital gain. So I will tell you what is this index cost of acquisition or improvement. We will discuss it in detail in the next lecture, but today with little introduction of that, we'll stop for the day. Now, whenever you acquire a particular capital asset, when you hold it for a substantial period of time and then you sell it, the law gives you some relief based on this indexation provisions. So every year the Income Tax Act, not Income Tax Act actually, the CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, they announce what is called as a index of that particular year, cost inflation index, CII as they call it. So cost inflation index is announced by the Income Tax Department. Earlier, it was announced every year with a cutoff date of 1/4/1981. Subsequently, that date has been advanced to 1/4/2001. So starting from 1st April 2001, every year a cost inflation index is announced by the department, by CBDT. So for first year, the CII is 100, and then for every subsequent year, a fresh CII is announced by the CBDT. So using the CII of the year of acquisition and the year of sale, we calculate index cost of acquisition, or maybe index cost of improvement in case of cost of improvement, by using a particular formula. So how the formula is devised, how do you determine the cost of acquisition, what is included there, what is cost of improvement, how do you get the index of a particular year, which index to be applied, all these questions we are going to answer in the next class. Okay, so whatever is your cost of acquisition or the cost of improvement, that needs to be indexed with reference to this cost inflation index. And once you do that, you get what is called as index cost of acquisition or index cost of improvement, and that will be deducted from the net consideration to arrive at the long-term capital gain. See, the whole idea of providing this indexation is you are acquiring the asset and then you are selling the capital asset after a few years. There might be inflationary trends which have raised the price of the asset or the value of asset. So this indexation benefit gives some relief to the SSC for all these inflationary and other kind of trends and try to reduce the tax liability burden on the SSC. That is the whole idea of providing this index cost of acquisition related benefit. Okay, so with this we will conclude the discussion for the day, and in the next lecture I will continue with the remaining provisions for income from capital gains. Let me download the attendance and then we will part for the day. Just give me a minute.